When I was younger, much younger, I used to have a very visual imagination. It was almost visual and vivid. I used to imagine things that how I thought they would be, and then actually encountering those things and realizing, wait a minute, what I have in my mind and the reality of what I encountered or what I was faced with was totally different. It was like, wow, maybe I had an overactive imagination at some point because my expectation was always one of disappointment when I did that. How many of you have fallen in love with someone based on the fantasy in your head versus the reality? How many of you have fallen in love with somebody's potential? I've done a lot of work on myself, not perfect. Me first want to say I'm not perfect. I'm a very imperfect being. But in doing a lot of self-introspection, I've come to understand that a lot of times when we fall in love with someone's potential, it's because the potential that we fall in love with is not really a manifestation of that person trying to be deceptive, is really us deceiving ourselves. Let me say that again. You falling in love with somebody's potential is not so much that person doing anything to you, but rather you doing something to yourself because you're setting the stage for an unrealistic expectation. And I talk a lot about unrealistic expectations. It is very easy to fall in love with someone's potential, especially when you start, dissecting certain characteristics that you like. You're like, handsome, beautiful, well-spoken, funny. For some people, funny is everything. Having someone who has a great sense of humor is on the top of their priority list. So when they're looking for potential and they see somebody who can be sociable, who can engage, and who walks into a room and lights up a room and holds other people's attention, for them, that's part of the potential that they have earmarked for this person in their life. And they solely, listen to the word, they solely focus on that point and neglect or forget about all the other things that they're seeing in that moment. It's like having a camera, taking the camera and just focusing on the tree branch instead of seeing the tree trunk. Now, it would be important for you if you could see the whole tree, but some people have a really unique knack of isolating and only seeing what they want to see. Tree trunk, tree branch, tree limb. How about taking in the whole tree? And that's what potential is. Potential is something that you can see it in the other person, or you recognize, you know what, this person really is a good person. This person really can go far. This person, they have this certain aspect of their life down pat. And all they need to do is translate that, whatever they're doing over here, into everything else. Well, it's not easy to do everything else unless the person wants to do everything else. You cannot manifest somebody else's potential for them. That person has to see their own potential and manifest that for themselves. Does that make sense? But many times we who are looking to engage in relationships, both male and female, we tend to isolate, we tend to take those snapshots, and we tend to bring those snapshots and try to make our whole picture. And it's not necessarily a tree, but we're making our own picture because the potential that we see also lines up with what we have imagined we want for ourselves. That's how that whole thing goes awry. It's like, you know what you want. You see something in somebody else that you think potentially could get you what you want, and you forgot to look at the rest of the story. You forgot to pay attention to the other characteristics. You forgot to pay attention to other tools or other red flags. Let's say red flags. And then you're here and you're like, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for. This is misrepresentation. Is it really misrepresentation? Because misrepresentation is a whole different thing. Misrepresentation is when somebody knows they don't have any potential, pretend they have potential, sell you on that potential, and then don't deliver on that potential. That's misrepresentation. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you falling in love with somebody's potential and not recognizing that that's not enough to carry a relationship or to have a healthy relationship. Until that other person recognizes their own potential, it is almost next to impossible to get that potential to be realized. One of the biggest issues I found with people and couples and in relationships is the notion that the potential a lot of times is looked upon because most people don't want to see the truth. Most people have blinders on like horses, you know, they're like, they only want to see what's in front of them. They don't want to see over there. They don't want to see over here. They're like this. They're like, I don't want to see anything that's going to distract me from my goal. It's like people who want to get married and all they see is marriage potential. All they hear is, I want to marry you. And they don't do an investigative report. They don't do a background check or search. I'm not saying you should do all these things. I'm just saying, but you just, it's like all you see is what you want to see. You can't see anything else because you're locked into that one aspect of potential that will give you your dream and your goal. And then years later, maybe months later, maybe weeks later, who knows, you're looking at this and you realize, wait a minute, something is not right here. I didn't see the whole picture. And that's where you start being honest with yourself and not blaming the other person, because a lot of times what happens is you will immediately start blaming the other person for deception. And the truth of the matter is they didn't really do anything to you that you did not allow. And I always say that nothing can be done to you without your permission. There are you know, exceptions, but most often than not, you give things permission. You allow things to happen in your life by whether you acknowledge them or you don't. You still are allowing those things in your life. Dealing with the fantasy in your head instead of the reality is a real thing. You know, when we're children fantasize, adults fantasize, but at some point, the fantasy and the reality have to collide. At some point, you have to stop seeing or envisioning what you want it to be and see it as it truly is. There's a saying that says, all that glitters is not gold. Just because it's shiny doesn't mean it's good. Just because it's wrapped well doesn't mean that it's not crap underneath the wrapping. You have to really have a realistic approach and not an unrealistic one when approaching relationships, when approaching other people. Because, you know, years ago when I used to work, my partner would say this to me. He said, everywhere you go, you like everybody. Everybody is cool at first until they're not. It's the same thing with a relationship. People are real cool until you get to know them. And even if you spend a lifetime getting to know someone, you're still going to learn different things every single time about that person. You may understand the basics, you may understand, you know, certain things about their character, but the behavior can change because you have hormones, you have experiences, you have life happening. So people's reactions to situations and circumstances will change. So what you unwrapped under the tree this Christmas is not necessarily going to remain the same thing unless it's an inanimate object. Unless it has no life in it, then that's good. But if it is a person, people change. And as people change, behaviors change. And as behaviors change, character can also change. What is locked in is essentially who you are. So I implore you to stop following the fantasy in your head. Identify, become more cognizant of when you're fantasizing versus the reality that's in front of you. You know, how many red flags are you supposed to see before you run? That's a question for you. For me, I usually run at one, maybe two, possibly three, but one red flag for me is always like, okay, pay attention. What are the other red flags? Some people love the notion of red flags because they're always pushing and pushing pushing past the red flags instead of letting the red flags stopping them like, hey, wait, don't go any further. Some people love pushing through those red flags because they're all consumed with their own individualistic fantasy and not wanting to look at the reality that's standing in front of them. For many of us, the reality helps us to avoid the pain that will come later on. It helps us to avoid the inner conflict that we are refusing to deal with. And it helps us to not deal with somebody else's conflict, especially if that person is not willing to choose or deal with their conflict. Stop, take a pause for a cause, and let the cause be that you're no longer going to operate on fantasy alone, At this point of the game, you need to have a more realistic approach. And that means getting to know someone, talking to them, asking them the right questions, understanding what their goals are, going with them. Years ago in psychology, there was such a thing where your psychologists need to go to the homes to observe the clients or patients, because you couldn't really tell what a patient was or understand that patient outside of the environment they were in. Go to where this person is, see where they're hanging out, see who they're hanging out with, get to know their family members, get to know their family history. Don't take it for granted just because somebody tells you, oh yeah, me and my family are great. Investigate. I'm not saying snoop, like Snoop Doggy Dogg, and I'm not saying invade people's privacy, which I'm totally against. What I'm saying is ask the right questions, spend more time with the individual. And if you're in a hurry and in a rush and you don't want to get past 3 months or a year, at least do due diligence and recognize that you do not understand this person totally. You cannot possibly understand them totally, and that everything is a learning curve, and that as you grow together, you're learning together. My name is Ingrid Felton. As always, thank you for visiting your YouTube channel. Thank you for watching the videos. Thank you for subscribing to the videos. Thank you for telling other people about what I'm doing here. As long as you show up, I promise to continue showing up as long as there's breath in my body. And I hope that you're having an amazing holiday, and let's make the holiday a better one by having a more realistic approach and realistic view on what you're seeing and what is in front of you. Take off the blinders. Allow yourself to see everything instead of seeing only what you choose to see. Bye.